Welcome to the Legion Report, episode 4. Part 1, I'm going to need 2 parts for this one because these two like the chat. I'm Ray Farrow.
And I'm Danny Hayter. Welcome to the Legion Report podcast.
Hi. Guys, on the show today, we've got some special guests, one international guest. We like to, we got our physios from South Coast RX. Welcome aboard, guys.
Oh, thank you so much for having us on.
Yeah, no, thank you. I've been looking forward to this all week.
Don't know if to say good morning or good evening. So,
I know. Yeah.
Do you know Dan's currently drinking red wine?
No, I've had that. That was.
He's had his bottle of red wine.
I'm actually in the future, which I think is nuts when you stop and think of it. It's
That's true. That is
night,
yeah.
So I can tell you what happens in the day.
Oh, brilliant, guys! It's really great to have you guys on today. I'm really looking forward to this. I've been looking forward to this for a few weeks now. We put a lot of prep and some planning in place because I feel that it's really important that we get across some of your, how you guys work, and I know you guys have put a lot of preparation into coming on today. So, just before we really get started, can you just give us a little bit of an intro to some of our listeners, just around you guys individually, and then you guys as a South Coast RX?
Yeah, we can start. My name's Cameron. I'm one of the physios at South Coast, and I suppose getting into physiotherapy, I took a slightly longer route than most people. So I initially wanted to go into the military. Ray, you're like this. I wanted to go into the Royal Marines when I was younger. So growing up, I knew that to go in as an officer, I needed to go and get a degree. So I had a real interest in sports and exercise science. So I undertook a sports and exercise science degree at Brunel University. But then during that process, I'd actually sustained quite a bad knee injury when I was 16. So I'd ruptured my cruciate ligament. Unfortunately, I got quite far through the application process. So I'd passed my psychometric testing, but I failed my medical. So I wasn't allowed to join up, and I wasn't allowed to join any of the services. So when I found out I was pretty devastated, to be honest. And I had to rethink where I wanted to go in my career. And having sustained that injury, I'd spent a long time with different physiotherapists. And that got me thinking that was actually something that perhaps I'd really like to do in my career. So I ended up applying and being accepted into Brighton University, and it was really similar to Dan. It was a pre-registration master's, so it gave me the physiotherapy qualification, but in an accelerated way. And then when you graduate as a physiotherapist, you can either specialise straight away, or you can go into different rotations. So I've moved around the hospital. So I worked as an inpatient physiotherapist in a discharge planning team, and also in neurological rehabilitation, and spent 6 months in an MSK service as well. And that's really where my passion for physiotherapy lies. So I got a breadth of experience across the hospital, across different specialisations, and then I moved to Portsmouth and specialised in MSK. So I've been working here now for 2 years. I'm now a senior physiotherapist in the NHS, and I absolutely love what I do. And it's been an absolute pleasure starting this company with Dan and doing something that we both really enjoy, and getting across our love of not only sport and exercise, but drawing from our knowledge that we've got in sports and exercise science as well. So that's me.
Yeah, no, it's a tough one to follow, Cam. As always raising the bar. Me and Cam, we've got so much in common, and it I say this to Cam quite a bit, but I love working with Cameron. He inspires me, and together it's almost been crazy how far we've come in such a short space of time, because we're both just real passionate about this, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about that a bit later. But in terms of my background, I've been a physiotherapist for 7 years. Similar to Cameron, my first degree was in sport and exercise science. I then finished that, and sports science is one of those degrees that you do it because you love it, I'm passionate about sports, but then almost like you finish it and you're like, well, what do I do now? And for me, it was either a strength and conditioning coach, a physiotherapist, or to join the police force. And I ended up doing some rotations, as in placement rotations in physiotherapy, and loved it. I loved how exercise could be applied to help people, and I went on and studied my master's at Southampton University. And then spent 2 years in the hospitals, again, similar to Cameron, doing my core rotations. But for me, I always wanted to specialise in MSK. So I worked hard, worked my way up in the NHS, working for Solent, both at Queen Alexandra and St Mary's Hospitals. Became a senior physio there and team lead. And that was awesome because I got the chance to do lots of in-service training for junior members of staff. Where I was the team lead, I worked predominantly in the shoulder pathway. So I got a chance to see a few more of those complex shoulder injuries, which I really enjoyed. And I'd say shoulders have to be my favourite joint, possibly because of that experience. I've dabbled throughout my NHS career in a bit of private work and worked part-time at Spire. That was awesome because it gives you like a different perspective and a different skill set working privately compared to the NHS, which has been good and really valuable in applying it to South Coast. And this last year, although Facebook and social media will make it look like I've just been having a laugh and having a great time, which I have, I've also been working. I've worked for it has to be said, a really good private company here. It's really well led. And I think you don't often say that about people that you work with, but I've really been inspired by the managers and the team around me for this company in New Zealand. And I've learned a lot that hopefully we can take back to South Coast. I worked here in MSK and also in rugby. So I did a bit of pitch sides and worked for a rugby league club here and was there for physio. And that's been epic. Rugby's so huge here. So yeah, got a varied range of experience, the foundation in sport and exercise. Yeah, I think that's me. I love CrossFit, I love sport.
Right, that's brilliant, guys. I think one thing that is evident, and anyone that knows these guys are probably also the same, is that your passion for what you do is just so clear. You know, an example, I might speak to Cam. We might just say hello, you know, just on a quick phone call or something, but we'd be on the phone for 40 minutes.
You can't have a quick.
Cam's actually sick of speaking to me on the phone. I bet you, when he sees me ring and he knows it's going to be a 45-minute chat.
But the part around that is that you guys are just so passionate, and I love that. You know, to see people passionate about what they do is incredibly inspiring. So yeah, I think that's a brilliant place to be. So really, we want to sort of get into South Coast RX and a little bit of stuff. So we're going to talk today around. So we've got two parts, as Ray mentioned there, and we're going to start with injury prevention, and we're going to really sort of take a focus on that in this podcast. But then, if there are people out there that have maybe missed that part, with an injury, and they've gone past the prevention side and they're now into that recovery phase, we're actually going to do a recovery podcast as well with you guys, aren't we? Which you're happy to come on and do that as well to help people. So looking forward to so first question really from us is South Coast RX, what makes you guys different? And do you have almost like a USP with what you do? I mean, your knowledge and your background says a massive amount about you both. And ultimately as a business, but is there something that sort of makes you different?
Yeah, no, mate. I'm glad you've in a sense. Well, I'm glad you've asked this question because it's something that Cam and I have spent a long time reflecting on, and actually like thinking about. Well, what does make us different? Because there's lots of physio providers out there, and we want to hopefully be a service that stands out to people. And essentially, I think above all, we practice what we preach. We set this business up with a bigger purpose of improving the lives of the people that we work with and empowering people in their pursuit of health and fitness. And hopefully, or I believe that we're ambassadors to that, where we exercise, we live a healthy lifestyle and practice what we preach. So we're in a position that we hopefully can advise people on how they can improve their health and their well-being. And through stemming on from that, through our participation in sport, one of the key things that Cam and I always go back to is that we can put ourselves in the patient or the client's shoes. We know exactly what it's like to feel injured, to feel frustrated, to feel down and not be able to do the thing that you love. And that puts us that gives us an advantage in treating somebody, because we're not just going to say, oh, you shouldn't do that, stop that because you need to rest and it's unsafe. That's the last thing we want to do. We want to keep people doing the things they love, because we genuinely understand how rubbish it feels to not be able to do it. And we've got examples which we could probably touch on now if you want to go into it, like about your ACL, or it's not silly. I've got my big toe, which I was just telling Cameron about, but
I think for us, that's one of the biggest factors that separate us, we think, is that lived experience. So beyond our academic training, you know, we are fusing sports and exercise science with physiotherapy and looking at it through a physiotherapy lens. So it's not just about diagnosis of injury. Actually, we are really well set up to help program you through your rehabilitation and make it specific to the demands of your sport. And it doesn't matter whether that's returning to team sport or whether it's returning back to CrossFit, because not only do we have that academic underpinning, we've actually got the lived experience of putting your body through those demands and understanding what that feels like. We've got that side of it where we know what it is like to be injured as well. But you know, in the formation of this company, we were really passionate about not just diagnosing injury and getting people coming back to see us. Our big thing is that we want to empower every single one of our clients that comes to see us with the knowledge and the tools to help them get better, so that they can manage their symptoms or improve them symptoms. And if they were to get injured again, they have that toolbox that they can dip into. They know what they need to do. If we can get people to the point where they don't need to come back and see us, that is absolutely our goal. And but beyond that as well, when they come to see us for an injury, we don't just we're not just diagnosing that injury. We're trying to trace back and look at what might be contributing factors, what could have caused that injury in the first place. Because if we can address that, that means that later on that injury might not occur again. So it's about prevention as well. I suppose that's our big thing, is prevent, recover.
Yeah. I think, sorry to interrupt, but it just leads in nicely, Cam. That's it. Prevent, recover, sustain is the slogan of our brand, and it's what we strive to deliver on with every patient that we see. We want the people that come in to see us to leave with that skill set of preventing that injury from reoccurring. So we've taught them what to do that's going to strengthen them up or condition them to a level that's not going to happen again. Obviously recover in the first instance and sustain it so that they're not coming back to see us. That's our ultimate goal. And I think Cam touched on it, but I've heard from friends and families, lots of people, they come away from physio and they haven't necessarily been told a diagnosis or expected recovery or what they can do. And that's something that I think that's like the grassroots of what physio should be. And definitely that's something that sets us apart, that we believe that we do well and can help people long term.
I think when you mentioned, sorry Ray, I was just going to say, you mentioned there about that sort of path, and you know, I've had injuries in the past where I've gone through almost like an NHS route, and then I've also seen you guys, and I think one thing that I did notice, that you guys set out a roadmap, which I think is really important. Like, you set a roadmap out as to what if you do these things, this is where you're going to be next, and if you do the next thing, this is where you're going to end up. And if you carry on, you know, you've almost got this outcome. Whereas if you do these things correctly, the outcome is that you're going to, you know, get back to doing what you do best, and that's really important.
That's one of the things. Again, we've worked hard to develop. It's almost like the 5-step process, isn't it, Cam? That we've got with everyone that we aim to see. We want people to leave with a diagnosis, an expected recovery time. We want to be able to help. So this is what we can do for your injury, and then also, and this is the most important bit, we want to empower. This is what you can do to speed up your recovery, prevent, recover, suspect, and sustain it. And then lastly, we lay out a plan of what those sessions are going to involve. So the patient knows exactly what to expect. 8 times out of 10, it goes to plan. Sometimes it doesn't, but we're adaptable as well. And we've got systems in place that we can refer on, like whether it's back to the GP. And so we'll take care of everyone in every situation.
No matter what way it goes, yeah.
No matter what.
Like
And
bespoke.
yeah, that some people do need to go back to see their GP or go through the NHS pathway for imaging, and that's fine. But we'll get we'll get everyone we see to what they need, and equally we recognise our own limitations as well. There's certain things that, well, that's beyond my scope. I'm going to refer you to someone who knows better. An example could be someone's getting injured through like their weightlifting technique. There's a point I can coach and I can give all the physiotherapy advice, but if they're better off having a session with Ray or James, then to tweak their technique, then we'll kind of get the other people involved as well.
Guys, I just think it's in, sorry, but
yeah.
before get it in while we can. One thing you said, like, is like when we look at injuries, and you guys look at injuries, and you said before, it's not necessarily, though you may have a knee injury, but like you was just saying then, Cam, it could be something that's led to that, whether that's technique or it could be a mobility issue. And I know me and Cam have been talking about recently about your movement screening, and I'm quite interested in that. And I think that's also a good way of preventing an injury in the first place, isn't it? Cam, if you know.
Yeah, definitely. So with our functional movement screen, this is something that we were going to perhaps touch on later. So this is an evidence-based tool that was that's been developed and scientifically researched, looking at key aspects of mobility across different joints, and as well as muscular control. And it is directly applicable, perhaps most applicable to CrossFit settings. So where we're looking at big either compound movements or Olympic lifting, specifically within CrossFit, you need, it's very rare across other sports that you need those end of range joint positions. And what this functional movement screen does is address in a very systematic way each joint, looking at their mobility. For example, if you are limited in your ankle mobility, that is going to have an effect higher up. So often people's squat is limited, back squat or overhead squat is limited by their ability to track their knees across their toes. And if you were to just watch someone squat, unless you were to isolate each joint, you wouldn't necessarily know what it was that was limiting them. But this functional movement screen is a really systematic way of testing all of those things in a really functional way. And this can highlight limitations that you can apply direct intervention to, that could perhaps either lead to prevention of injury, but also it's going to optimize your performance. So it works across two.
I think for sure, and just building upon that, if I can just give like maybe an example, we do the FMS. So it's a screen that involves 7 tests. They'll be looking at your shoulder, lower limb, spinal mobility, unilateral strength, as Cam said. Say we've detected on someone, they've scored lower in their shoulder mobility on their right side, for argument's sake. They can lock out on the left, but on the right it's restricted due to an old injury, for example. That's an impairment that we've identified on the tool that's potentially going to limit them, say, on a lockout of a jerk, where they haven't got the shoulder mobility to lock out overhead. That means the barbell the weight isn't optimally distributed in the strongest position. So that could potentially, if not addressed, lead to an injury. And that's where the FMS is pretty good. It can detect these things that in a sport such as CrossFit, you need good muscle symmetry, you need good mobility. In CrossFit, that's efficiency of movement. You need to be able to hit the depth, hit the range to distribute the load and ultimately be more efficient. I'll just add in though, because there'll be some people listening that might be hot on their research. There is limited evidence whether this tool actually can be used to predict injury. But I personally think it's really useful. But there is, if you look at papers, some will say, yeah, this tool, if you score low, you're more likely to get an injury. Others will say, oh, it doesn't matter if you score low. But I think what you have to do is apply it to the individual and to their sport. So the FMS is functional. It's a functional movement screen. So it applies really well to CrossFit. You can't necessarily apply that to football. where shoulder mobility arguably isn't as relevant. But in CrossFit, I'd say it's really specific, and it would be interesting to see a paper that relates it to CrossFit. I think that would show. What do you think, Cam? I think that would show like that is. There might be a significant...
I strongly feel that the FMS is most applicable to that sport. I mean, as I said, those end of range joint positions aren't necessarily required in a large number of other sports. When we
go on, sorry, I'll let you finish.
Sorry, go on. Right?
No, the thing you said.
No, I was just going to say, when we come on, go on, Ray.
No, I think you're saying applying it to CrossFit and it's not applicable to other, or maybe not be as applicable. But if you look at it, because I don't want people thinking if they don't do CrossFit, then they don't really need to worry about movement screening. But I think it's a good thing for everyone to be aware of. Like necessarily, if you've got really tight ankles, that could affect so many other things, running, day-to-day stuff as well, and exercise like ankles. I think ankles, shoulders. If we can start to highlight some of those inefficiency of your movement patterns, end of range, like you say, it's injury prevention.
I completely agree. Yeah, 100% agree. The only reason I mentioned it is there'll be some listeners that read journals and they're really hot on the evidence. So it's almost like me getting it in there as you have to apply everything to the individual. But 100% my bias is movement screening. It's a physio assessment, isn't it? It's what we do all the time, Cam. We assess movement, whether it's through a specific tool like the FMS or just our objective assessment. We're looking for impairments that ultimately could be the cause or could lead to an injury. So I completely agree, Ray.
Because like you say, for instance, someone who can't get their arms above their head normally, just a normal person, they're obviously going to have a lot of tension in the back, tight thoracic. That's going to then lead to lower back pains and stuff like that. I want other people to think that it's not just rotated around exercise, is it?
Yeah, no, you're right, and it's even to be fair, the most of our patients, it's not always CrossFit athletes. It will be the painter who does lots of overhead work. If you're talking about shoulders, it will be builder who spends a lot of time in a deep squat but hasn't got the range to do it. You're right, and that's always been part of physio. We assess movement and then give the exercise or the manual therapy together with the exercise to address that impairment. I think it's super valuable, and hopefully listeners out there, it's one of the things that they'll be like, oh, maybe that is something I should do to be proactive. And the whole podcast is on injury prevention. That's something that you could do to be more aware yourself on what you need to work on and be a bit accountable for yourself. Like, I know my own weaknesses, but I'm lucky that I'm a physio and I've got a background in sport and exercise science and I've had good coaches, but other people don't have that. So hopefully this helps them.
And sometimes unless you assess it in a systematic way, you're not too sure where your limitations are. And the advantage of the FMS is where it is systematic, you get an individualized report. So you get a really good idea of how your body's moving, and off the back of that, a really targeted intervention that might be there to address either mobility or strength limitations, control limitations, and that's where we apply that intervention. So absolutely, I would agree that it's a really useful thing, no matter what your sport.
Yeah,
something that could be of benefit to you.
You'll get a unique prehab program as a result of it, which is a good thing. You'll get your own specific accessory and mobility work. Generic stuff is good, but this is honed into you, so it is really good.
Yeah, brilliant.
And like you say, it's good to do before you get injured. That's what we're saying now. That's what we're trying to get out to the listeners. Like, I haven't been injured, I'm fine, but there's a road and you want to head down the right one and not the bad one.
We're bad businessmen, because that's ultimately what we're trying to do, prevent people from even coming to see us. But that's what physiotherapy should be. Like it's, and that's, I think, from a personal experience, I've been lucky to to kind of train quite hard and at high intensity, but stay injury free. And it's because stay behind and stretch, stay behind and do unilateral work. Come to all the program sessions where it is unilateral session, like it's, and the recovery sessions. And we'll talk about that later. But it's, if you do all that stuff, you do reduce your risk of injuries. And there's two types of injuries which we've got. Hopefully, we'll talk about in another question, and how you can prevent almost like the overtraining type of injury. Which
this is my that was my next question. So getting into
well,
getting nice link into like almost like getting deep into the science now, and you know, the question really from this is, what actually is an injury? You know, we talk about it, and you know, what actually is an injury? How does that get the science behind that? I think is quite interesting, because you know, I don't really feel that a lot of people actually know the deep level science behind why it's happening and what it actually is.
Yeah, so I suppose in a really broad sense, and I want to stress that this is from a very physiological point of view. In a very broad sense, most injuries can be attributed to talking about load. So when a load exceeds tissue capacity, something's got to give. And I'll put that in context in a second. But I suppose the tissues in your body that could get injured, you've got bone, muscles, tendon, ligament, nerves even. But fundamentally, the principle remains the same in all of them. So when load exceeds tissue capacity, and just to put that in context, imagine if you were pulling a Christmas cracker. This is just an example. So that cracker can tolerate a certain amount of load before breaking. However, you cross a critical threshold, and at that point, something's going to give. But I don't want everyone to think that their muscles are Christmas crackers. You know, your body is much more strong and resilient than a Christmas cracker. But that just puts into context that there is a load that goes through those tissues that can then contribute to injury. But sports injuries specifically can be further subdivided. You've either got contact injuries or non-contact injuries. So contact injuries are often high energy, rapid change of force going through the tissues, and they're often associated with impact. So think about a 2 foot to the knee in Sunday league. This is where often the worst injuries is sustained. So that's an example of contact, whereas non-contact, these really where the majority of injuries come from. So these can be high energy, high force. Think of a runner going jogging at the weekend and trying to do a sprint within that run, and pulling their calf, for example. So there's still high energy causing that, lots of load going through the tissue beyond its capacity, and you get a muscular injury, for example. But then you can also get this low grade overloading of tissues over a long period of time. People often refer to them as repetitive strain, things like tennis elbow. But in research and physiotherapy, they're referred to as tendinopathies. These are injuries to the tendon themselves. So fundamentally, and a lot of what we're going to be talking about in our interventions is associated with that load. So that again, from a physiological perspective, is generally what an injury would be considered to be.
Yeah, I think just almost like making it real simple, when load exceeds the tissues or the muscles capacity. So if you apply a stimulus, if I lift the weight that I am not trained and my muscles aren't accustomed to, then in theory, that's too much load, more than what I've adapted to. And that could be, I don't like to say the breaking point, but we'll use that word for this, the breaking point. But as Cam said, our bodies are strong. There's lots more factors that come into play, but breaking it down, you've applied a force which is beyond what you've trained for, but beyond what your body's adapted to, and that's going to cause an inflammatory response and tissue damage, and then your body heals, obviously, but that's the summary of an injury. And I think we'll touch upon maybe how there's lots of psychology involved in that as well. We've just talked about the biomechanics here, but there's lots. So people's past experiences will affect how much pain they feel. So an example could be, if I have hurt my back before, I've had a real bad back injury. my cousin had a spinal fusion. These are thoughts in the back of my head, and then I'm back squatting in the gym, and my back, like I feel something in my back go, and I get sudden pain. Then because of that association, that my mind is making that assumption that there's a potential that the pain I feel is going to feel worse than someone. We all know that there's some people in the gym that are just like tough, like, and they'll do a crazy deadlift and they'll feel their back sore, but they'll just shrug it off. And it's almost like the contrast, and that's the psychology, and that's really interesting as well. And when we're treating people, we have to look at that, and it's not just the biomechanics. We have to take a whole history and see, well, is there anything else that's there that's contributing? I think that kind of summarizes it. Is it the biomechanics and touches on the psychology as well? It's a bio. What's the word, Cam? I've forgotten it. Biopsychosocial.
Social approach, and it's what physiotherapy is underpinned by, and it's acknowledging that every client is unique. They are a makeup of their physiology and their psychology and social factors as well. And that's something that underpins our practice in South Coast, is that we don't just address the tissue damage. We look at the individual and what their concerns are, because unless you address that, is going to limit recovery.
Yeah. I think
sorry, Gary.
I think that's extremely important, like you just said there, that everyone's treated differently and not treated just by the pamphlet as you go through it. And I think that's when we talked about your experience earlier. That's what makes you different. You understand training. You understand how people feel going through that process. You know, whether that's preventing or recovering from an injury. Yeah.
Yeah, and really interesting.
Sorry, Damien.
No, mate, go. Please go.
I was just going to say, everyone's different. And I think as a junior physio, I didn't appreciate or realise that as I do now. I think the lens through which I see physio has gotten a lot bigger, and I'm sure it will only continue to get bigger. There's still so much to learn. But before, I was like, you learn it like a textbook, don't you? You're like, this intervention for this injury, and it will work for 60, 70%. But then there's people that fall outside that, and that's where we're all unique and we're all different. And that's what we can bring to the table, and what we apply with everyone that we see, that individual assessment, looking at the biopsychosocial aspects, and hope it all stems back to that prevent, recover, sustain. If we can do that well, then you're going to have that recipe and that toolkit to take you forwards and manage your injury long term. And hopefully, what we always say is we want that injury was something negative, but we want to turn it into a positive, and hopefully at the end of it, you leave stronger and better than when you came in to see us.
I like the you joining for me anyway, and hopefully the listeners, you can see the dots joining up from the part where you assess people at the beginning, even without an injury, to the point of actually now we're getting to a point where load exceeds the tissue capabilities. You can really see the dots joining up. I think the next dot, I guess, is that, you know, people like to push themselves to certain limits, and this is going to touch into the psychology part later on. But people always push themselves to limits. People always want to try and make sure that their bodies can do extra. We're always trying to push ourselves. We know there's people out there that, you know, the Ross Edgeleys of the world, let's say, that are trying to really sort of body can do. And it probably leads me on to the next question: is that, can an injury actually completely be prevented based on someone like that? So is injury, you know, is prevention of injury actually, is it completely possible, or is it always are you guys always going to be in a job in some respect, you know?
I think that is a real good question. I'll answer it. Yeah, I think if you remember Cam's definition of an injury, there's two types. There's that traumatic, and then there's a non-traumatic. I think the traumatic injuries, you can't prevent, because they typically occur in a high force situation. Normally an external force is applied. So rugby, for example, someone's getting tackled, forced to the knee, that's going to put pressure on the inside ligaments of the knee, and that could cause an injury. No matter how skillful the athlete is, how strong they are, how experienced they are, they can't predict that someone's going to take their knee out, or that two-footed tackle that Cam said, and that's just bad luck, and that's a risk of the sport. And similarly, if you're pushing and pushing, there's a point that's a risk that you can't prevent. But flip it now to the other type of injury, that the non-traumatic that we talked about. They typically occur as a result of training errors. So you've got, say, someone who's always in that red zone. They're training hard. They're always maxing out in their lifts. They're not giving their bodies a chance to recover. So if you think of hypertrophy in its most simplest form, you break the muscle fiber down. It will grow back stronger if you rest and let it. If you don't, if you keep smashing it and smashing it and smashing it at that intensity, then ultimately you're going to have a weaker muscle because you haven't given it time to repair. That can be prevented through sensible programming and just knowing yourself and listening to your body. But that comes with like good coaching, which I know at the Legion it's awesome. But a lot of sometimes individuals don't have that awareness to look back and reflect on, whether it's ego or just inexperience. But that can be prevented. These tendinopathy injuries. And then you've got the flip side as well, like a novice who comes in and is real keen, has just lost some weight, feeling good, and just is hitting it a bit too hard. And going back to that tissues adaptability, they haven't had a chance to build that strength. The rate of progression is too fast. Again, with sensible programming, that can be prevented. And then the other one, which we've talked about from Ray's question, was the FMS. I think if you're proactive and you work on those impairments and those limitations in your ankle, your shoulder, you won't know you're preventing injury because you hopefully won't have got it. But I think it does something and it's helping. So yeah, I think you can, but it depends the injury. It depends on the type of injury. Sorry.
Yeah.
And there's really good evidence to show that most non-contact injuries are actually driven by errors in training, in what they refer to as training errors. And it relates really well to your podcast that you did a couple of weeks ago about training smart. And this is going to be one of the biggest things that you can do that's going to help prevent common injuries and ones that you would expect perhaps in the gym through non-contact. And Dan, you're going to talk a little bit about that now, aren't you? About the frequency, intensity, volume of training.
Yeah, so I can touch on that now. So so one of the things I think is two-way. The programming, which again I've always thought the programming is really good because it will have like a block where it's incremental, and then there'll always be a deload. So the programming that you follow has got to have those increases, but also giving the body time to rest, get stronger, recover, so then you can hit it hard in the next cycle. So that periodized approach is really important, and that comes from the coach. But then I think the bigger aspect is the individual. One of the things that you can look at is called the training load factor. So you can break it down into 3 components. One is how often are you training, so frequency. Secondly, how intense are you training? So at the end of each session or at the end of the week, 0 to 10. Are you so sore you can't walk down the stairs, you can't lift your arms up because you've smashed it so hard? That's a 10 out of 10. Or was it you coasted through and you don't even feel it? So it's more a 1 or 0 out of 10. So how intense was your sessions? And then how long, so the volume. So take a typical week, someone trains 3 times a week, hour sessions, and then the intensity was an 8 out of 10. So 3 times 1 is 3, times 8 is 24. You times them all, frequency, volume, and intensity. Times that gives you a number. So for this person, it's 24. At the end of the week, they can think, I feel really good. Cool, maybe I can add an extra session in. That's going to make that number higher. Or if they feel, say that number's really high at the end of the week, they've trained 7 days of the week and it's like 100 and they're so sore, then they've got to drop something. But it gives you a nice objective number that you can reflect on. And I think on the back of this, maybe we'll do a post on it that just breaks it down on social media so people can see what we're talking about. But what we should do is, you can't hit all three hard. You can't train 7 days a week at 10 out of 10 intensity for 3-4 hours. That's too much volume, too intense, and it's too much. Even for an elite athlete, they have to periodize it. So if you want to train 7 days a week, you're going to have some sessions which are low load, like a swim or a mobility session. If you're training just 3 times a week, then arguably you can hit them hard because you've got a rest day in between. And it's just that I guess manipulation of variables and awareness of your body. There's lots of concepts to it, but ultimately it comes down to your experience, your skill set. You call it your training age. Someone who's been doing CrossFit for 10 years is going to be able to tolerate more load because they've got the movement patterns and they've got that strength and they can tolerate it. Someone who's new, they've got to do less. But it's that manipulation into a I guess weekly. It works well for me, but yeah, there's always the bigger plan of like the month or your long-term goal. That's something that helps me prevent injuries, because you won't react.
And when you're looking at what Dan's talking about there, it feeds right back into what you were saying about training smart. And when you relate that back to why an injury occurs and that load that goes through muscles, you can see how what Dan is talking about is manipulating that load that is going through your muscles enough for you to adapt and get stronger, but you're avoiding big spikes in load at any given time that can contribute towards that overload and towards that injury. And I think the beauty of the programming at the Legion is that is already being thought about without you really having to think about it. You program stuff in microcycles, weekly microcycles. You've got a max cycle and then a deload week. So you're already looking to peak people through that, but then also there's an individual responsibility. So at the Legion, you've got levels, and depending on how you're feeling that day, you can either push yourself, go up a level, or scale it back down, work at a lighter level. And big part of that, and what we want to get across as well, is listening to your body. I think that on any given day, you need to respect that feeling of soreness and think about the intensity of that next workout coming up. But that is one of the biggest things that you can do. If you take that in mind, that's going to help perhaps overloading those tissues and contributing to an injury. So one of the biggest things you can do to help prevent injury in the first place.
Yeah, train smart. Listen to your coach. Listen to your body, I think.
Yeah, listening to your body is a really real a key factor, I think, because you get warning signs. A lot of the time you get a few warnings, you're like, you know what, I was feeling a little bit tight there, or was just whatever, but I carried on and then boom, so it went wrong. Yeah. It's because it's such a thin line between progress and adapting to the stress that you put on your body to get stronger, to overboiling
and it is a thin line, and you learn from mistakes. Like I've done it. I get sucked in, and I should know better. But like I've done a high volume of like pull-ups and then into pressing, and then the next day is like a max lift, and I know I'm sore, but I just get tempted into it. But then that makes me. You learn from the mistakes you make, but it's a real line actually between like you said, trying to improve. Yeah. Because you don't always want to back off, otherwise you'll never get better, you'll never grow. So there is a level of risk, like we talked about, in everything. We want it to be calculated and reduce the risk, and just small increments is the key, I think, over a long time. Don't be patient. Be patient.
That's really important. You think of your goals as a longer distance. Just try to spread them out a little bit longer than you would do normally. And chip away at that and be consistent, isn't it? And build up to it gradually, and you'll get there. We've seen it so many times in the gym. The guys who can be consistent are the ones that progress a lot in the whole year, rather than you see these guys who smash it and then bang, something goes wrong and they're out or can't do anything for weeks.
You're so true. It's so true.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's interesting because I've heard it before. I'm sure you guys have. In fact, you might have even said it before. I'm sure I have. That comment of, I really like that feeling when you wake up in the morning and you're feeling sore. And if I don't get that feeling, I don't feel I've worked hard enough. You sort of get that, and now experience, someone who's a bit more experienced, I sort of think, okay, yes, that is a good feeling, but also it's also a really good warning sign to say, actually, today, tomorrow is a good opportunity to take a step back. You're almost getting a signal to say, here's a good example for you to step back now, because you're getting those DOMs, if you like.
What, what's good about CrossFit is you can modify it. You can feel super sore in your shoulders. That doesn't mean you have to skip the next day's session. You can go in, do some light erg work. You can back squat. You can work your legs. You can still keep the intensity, but you've actually rested that sore part. So it's not. We're never saying, oh, just don't do anything. Like, it, just adapt, be flexible, think of the long-term plan, and be patient, and you'll get there, and you'll be injury free, and you'll be better for it.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, I know what you're saying, because I feel like that. He was like, that's a good session. I feel real like sore.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you sort of you've sort of worked yourself hard, which is, but on the flip side to that, you've also got to have a bit of a mindset that is actually just take a little bit of a step. It's a good warning sign. That's how I look at it anyway. So I go, okay, well, I know that if that's hurting or if that's sore, that's a good time for me to maybe just take a step back. We're very lucky in the gym that we go to, that we have almost like a level based system where you have like level 4 is maybe your heavier weight, and level 1 is a lighter weight, and it's a good opportunity to go, actually, I'm going to step back from 4 to 1, or 4 to 2, or 3 to 1, however you want to do it. But it's just a good, almost like a good notification that just pops up. So I wanted to touch on, I think you've almost touched a little bit on prevention programming, which I'm going to come to in a minute, but this is quite you mentioned some of the psychology stuff back at the top of the show, and the question was around, so you guys sent me some really interesting information and a paper around some of the things you do and how you work, and one of the parts of that paper was your holistic approach when you assess a patient, and some of the let's say the education part that has to go in from the psychology perspective of someone who's maybe had an injury in the past, but can't almost move to that next level because they're almost worried in the back of their heads that, well, actually, I've got this back pain, but you need to kick them on a little bit more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's such a fundamental part of our assessment at South Coast, but also it underpins our clinical practice as physiotherapists. But, again, touching on what I said earlier, that each client is a complex makeup of their physiology, of their biology, of their psychology, and social factors as well. Unless you explore all of those in the assessment, you might not get down to the bottom of what might prevent someone recovering. So use an example of back pain. Say someone has had a previous injury, and they've become really fearful of moving their back normally. If we just assess them and say, it doesn't appear that you have an injury of your back now, do these exercises, unless we address that factor, they're still going to have those fears, those worries, those concerns, because, the last time they did a deadlift, they might have hurt their back. So it's really important to address that and to discuss that. And I think that in terms of back pain specifically, that can be one of the things that holds people back the most out of their recovery. So letting them know something is safe to do, and also I suppose it's the same as programming with anything, graded exposure, starting off at something that's a little bit easier and making it progressively harder, and then giving someone that confidence to go, actually, do you know what, I can do this, and they're making those strength gains associated with that, to the point at which they've got a really strong, robust and resilient back that they feel confident in.
I think, yeah, building upon that, when we treat people, you can there's two broad spectrums in the style that you of the intervention that you'll apply. Some people just push on. You need to put the reins on them, adapt what they do, and then they'll get better in that sense. But there's other people that and that's what we're touching on this question, is that they're real fearful, so they perhaps avoided something from a past injury. The approach there is a bit more subtle, and you want to you want to rehab them, but you also want to expose them into the thing that they've been avoided. And by doing the thing that you're fearful of, you actually violate that perception in your brain, which is a protective mechanism, and that's how you fully rehab an injury. So it's not just, it could be that someone's actually just been avoiding something, like a deadlift, like Cam said. So we need to get them back ultimately doing deadlifts, but that might take time. That's not going to happen in one session, but it's through it's unpicking their understanding. A lot of what we all go off is rumors with some truth in it, but it's made a lot worse in our minds. So we have to kind of just make sure they know all the facts. So we'll reassure. We're always positive, because the body is amazing, really. It's adaptable and it heals to an amazing degree, really. So that's the message we're trying to get across, and just get that person better to do what they want to do fully, not just brush over the injury. Your back's better, but actually they're still avoiding that. So we need to get them back to doing that through exposing them into the movement. I think just before the podcast, I mentioned the experience I had with handstands. When I first started CrossFit, I was scared of going upside down, because I thought I'd land on my neck. But it took Ray next to me, like reassuring me, kind of helping me up the first couple of times. And once I did it 2 or 3 times, I knew I was safe. I wasn't going to hurt myself. And it's that same concept, graded exposure, teaching that it's safe to do over time, and that's going to get someone better long term, as well. So it's quite complex, managing the injury, and it goes back to managing the person, helping the person as an individual as well, in their own unique way. People will need a different skill set and a different tone, which hopefully we can adapt to and help people. Right.
Yeah, no, that's I think it's like that education piece. If you mentioned it before, the mindset of, you had someone who, a friend that's maybe hurt their back doing something, someone had their, a spine fusion, and then you get that little bit in your head, you go, oh no, I'm just going to stay away from that now. Whereas actually, you need to almost get that education piece across. It's interesting that that's the route you go, and you have to be really bespoke. And I guess that makes a lot of sense as well, because like you said right at the beginning, everyone's different. Everyone's got a different, not only have they got different injuries, but they've also got different thought processes to why they've got it, how they've got it, and how they're going to recover from that. So, we'll go into obviously the recovery side in part 2 of the podcast in a week or two's time. But yeah, I love the idea that you've got these processes in place that help nice and steady and make sure things are going in the right direction, and not just from that one injury. It could be because of something else, like Ray said previously. It might be something else that's really, really tight and not being looked after. That's the reason why that's happened. So let's do everything. Let's not just focus on this one point. So
yeah, that's a really good point, Annie. We do try and just look at the bigger picture as well. But I think that's the same as coaching, isn't it? You'd coach me differently to somebody else, because you'll pick up what we respond best to. Like, you might be able to shout at someone and say, come on, whereas someone else might not like that intensity, and you'd have to be a bit more subtle, maybe, in your style. But
yeah, definitely. I think, and that goes with experience. Like you say, it's only so much a book can teach you. Yeah, it's life, isn't it? It's so much a book can teach you. It's your life experiences, your coaching experiences, your experiences in the sport itself, experiences through injuries, seeing exposed to different injuries for different people, and that's and that's how you get better over time. And like, you guys are always there trying to improve, and I think that's as important for a coach to do as well, to always keep your mind open to every different training principle, every injury, every remote mobility exercise. Just stay open and learn, always learn. I think that's what, and that's why you guys do well, I think.
Just learn from you, Ray.
We all learn from one another, mate. That's the beauty of it.
So I guess going into almost probably say the golden ticket for anyone listening is that, you know, prevention programming, and you know, we've talked about prevention today. What do you guys, and you've probably touched on it with some of your processes that you do, but what would you guys and how would you advise and how would you program a prevention? You've almost touched on it, to be fair, right at the beginning with some of the analysis that you do, even if you're not already injured, and so we're just almost reverting back to that again.
Yeah, it's good to summarize it, I guess, for the end. Train smart has got to be number one, which we've talked about. Be mindful of those variables, so frequency, intensity, and volume. How much are you doing? Are you adapted? Are you prepared to do that much? So consider your training age and your experience. That's got to be the number one. Listen to your body. Be adaptable. Be flexible. Don't be scared to just change what you had planned if it means you can train longer and harder in the long. Think of the long-term plan and be patient. I think yeah, that's the key one.
Yeah. And that has to overarch everything, doesn't it? It doesn't matter what principles you apply for injury prevention. If you are just overloading yourself on a daily basis, you're always exceeding your tissue capacity. And it doesn't matter how strong and robust you are, that's still an overload that your body might not be able to deal with. So that principle has to govern everything else. But I think what's really important for the listeners of the podcast who are members of the Legion or who enjoy getting kind of functional style of fitness or fit, I know, Ray, this is something that you're always going on about, but from a physiotherapy point of view, this is something that's really important for CrossFit as well, is mobility. And when you look at what an injury is with CrossFit, mobility is so important because mobility into those movements, synonymous with CrossFit, so overhead squat, snatches, clean things. If you can hold the bar in an efficient position, it distributes load across your body evenly. If you have limitations in mobility, you can overload specific muscle groups quite easily. So, for example, if you've got a limitation in your front rack mobility and you're holding the bar a little bit more forwards, that's going to be loading your shoulders more, it's going to be loading your lower back more. And as you add weight, that is going to contribute to that overload, which could contribute to injury. So mobility and ensuring the bar is moving in an efficient path is so important.
Yeah, train smart, mobility programmed into your week, and accessory strengthening as well. One thing, like I think CrossFit is great, and sports themselves are great, but they tend, or let's go to CrossFit. It's normally high intensity, fast, explosive movements. So if you can add into your programming some specific isolated accessory strengthening, whether it's like a rotator cuff exercise that's slow and controlled, or some tempo hill raises off some plates, that's a different load and a type of contraction going through the muscle, which is a bit slower, a bit more individualized to one muscle, which you won't necessarily get unless you're proactive and you do. But that stuff makes your tendons and your muscle in itself real strong, and that helps prevent injuries. And I think there was an interesting paper I read. Bodybuilders have one of the lowest rates of injury in all sports. And if you think what they do, they're strengthening up each muscle, like in isolation, going through all the types
in a really controlled way. Yeah.
So if you can apply some bodybuilding exercises into and mobility into your CrossFit program, that the individual does at home as part of their program, then that's going to be real helpful. And train smart. They're the key things, I think.
It's quite funny because going back to the head as well, we used to, like, you know, one of our sessions used to be unilateral strength.
Yeah, I remember.
So, but the attendance used to go down quite a bit, and I used to get really frustrated. But listeners are going to hear now. I changed it around to functional bodybuilding. It's the same thing, right? But it's one of our highest boxes.
Bench.
That's just branding. Yeah.
And just making people into to do the things that they need to do, not necessarily what they want to do.
But how often with that functional bodybuilding, with that unilateral approach, a lot of the stuff when you're holding a barbell, you're using both sides of your body at the same time. Yeah. Unless you strip it back and look at unilateral movements, you would often not know, oh wow, there's a real underlying weakness on one side compared to another. Yeah, so that gives you an opportunity to focus in on that, strengthen that up, which makes you a better athlete overall. But again, contributes to reduced injury risk.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can't do that in a WOD. It's too fast. And you're not aware of those imbalances in a Metcon. You have to do your conditioning, do your strength training, but then you've got to strip it back to that unilateral work so that you become more body aware. And that's going to help you. And I can speak from a personal experience as a physio. Like my left shoulder is weaker than my right. I have to work hard at it. Otherwise, I know when I'm doing a snatch, my shoulder's going to roll in a bit. But I'm lucky that I'm aware of it. It's what we're trying to do is make people more aware of their own unique.
I think even like putting CrossFit aside, strength conditioning, powerlifting, anything like that, where you are just mainly compound movements. Unless you go down and do these unilateral stuff or whatever you want to call it, functional bodybuilding, because your body compensates so much without you aware. You go, right, you're saying, I'm going to put this bar over my head, right? Your body go, oh, the right side's not quite so strong here. We'll have to push a little bit more on the left. Or even in the squat. The squat's a classic one. You'll see people come up, one side come up a lot quicker, a lot stronger than the other, but you'll still get up. And they won't even feel it. They won't even know they did that. Unless you start putting some tempo in there or, like you say, unilateral stuff in there. People could go on squatting for years without realising that their left leg is or their right leg stronger than the other. And that's then when all of a sudden something got to give because they're leaning on one side or whatever, you know?
And that's what we mean sometimes about getting to the root of what might contributed to that injury, because then you need to look at that functional movement and strip it back and see what might been, oh wow, there's an underlying weakness there, and there might be a limitation in mobility in your ankle which has offset that. And actually, if you target those two things, it's not just about, for example, I know, Ray, I'm using you as an example, it's not necessarily just your hamstring. Actually, it's stemming from a limitation in mobility that has caused a load somewhere else. And that's super complex. Sometimes you can get lost in that and think, I don't really know where to start. But that's where the functional movement screen can really help. Because,
goes back to that.
Then you're diving in on those really specific limitations.
Yeah, that's a really. I think I think if you know, without having a big queue at the door when we're allowed to come out, but I think that screening, that functional movement screening, is really, you know, obviously you advise it, and
I know this is one thing we're going to be offering to our members, you know, through you guys, the functional movement screening, because we're so. If we believe in it as coaches, then we should be really trying to push that into our members to how important it is to stay injury free. And it's one that I think it's the first progress in that journey or in that goal, should we say?
Yeah,
I think that leads on quite well today, doesn't it? To start wrapping things up. Go on, Dan. You were going to say.
Oh, I was just going to say in that education and that awareness of your body, if anything, it makes you. Oh shit! I didn't realise that. I didn't know that I was weaker on that leg, or that my shoulder didn't go back so far on that one side. So I'm going to work on that now, and it's buy-in to the bodybuilding unilateral exercises and the mobility work. It's like I see the value of that now because you've applied it to me. It's not just a blanket thing that's like a chore. This is going to help me. So it is real valuable.
I think, like you say, the education piece. A lot of people aren't. You know, a lot of people just go, oh, you know, you just come into the gym, they do their bit, you know, they will go up one side, they get the lift done, and it's fine. Once you've given them that piece of education, it's amazing the response. They go, like you just said there, Dan. Oh, okay, like that absolutely no interest in what it was. They were just more interested just getting it done. And as soon as you go into that education piece and you sort of give them a little bit of some construction as to how to move that forward, you really, people do respond quite well to that, and which is why I think the FMS would be fantastic for anyone out there in any sport, in whatever it is you do, or however you lift. So
yeah. All right. Okay, so that wraps us up for today, guys. We're obviously going to have you guys back soon. We'll work out the timing and that, but we'll get that up as soon as we can. And that's obviously going to be on the actual injury itself, isn't it? Was that what he was talking about?
Yeah, the recovery. Yeah.
The injury and the recovering from that. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks very much, guys. Really appreciate you coming on today. So looking forward to speaking more to you guys again on this this very interesting subject.
Thank you so much for having us on.
Thanks for having us, guys.
No worries. See you soon, bro.
All right, see ya.
Guys.